They're going.
Hello, everybody out there. Hello, replicants.
Going. There we go. Yeah, we're up.
A lot of people in chat today. Really looking forward to geeking out with everyone. Getting final things set up on our end.
Trying to break stuff as usual.
Yeah, thank you everybody for showing up today. This is our first time streaming to multiple platforms at once. So your feedback is appreciated. Let us know how the audio quality is, so on and so forth. If anybody's too loud, too quiet, your feedback is appreciated. Today, we are doing Geek Out session number 14 for We Are Many, Bobiverse Book 2 by Dennis E. Taylor. For those of you new to the channel, I am your host, Carl, and with me I have my co-host, Peter. And
Hello.
we're looking forward to getting into the book discussion. So typically the way these work is spoilers are fair game up into the current book. So if you have not read the book yet and you don't want any major spoilers, go ahead and back out of the stream now, because everything is on the table. Typically, we go ahead and we just dive right into the book discussion, but today we're going to change things up a little bit. But first and foremost, how are you doing today, Pete?
I'm doing well. Hectic week, as we'll get into, but glad to be here. Thank you, Matt, for the loud and clear on this end. Glad our audio is coming through.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been a pretty hectic week for a lot of people, and if you pay attention to the news or anything at all, um, this pandemic is impacting a lot of people in a lot of places. Um, so today we're kind of going to change the tone a little bit, keep it a little bit more casual, leading into the book discussion. Want to revisit book one a little bit, talk about some of the things we enjoyed there, and just keep everybody company. Awesome. So yeah, let's see here. So yeah, book one, or Bobiverse, summary for it is it's pretty much a series about a man, a human who dies and then has his information from his brain copied and placed into a computer, Matrix C, right? Um, a lot of time in book one, we spend learning about their world and what's changed, and really relating to him through his experience. And uh, yeah,
And learning how to be a replicant and learning about
right,
the technologies and the Amy controllers.
right. Um, Sorry, multitasking. Length of the discussion. Typically, we do the stream anywhere around 2 hours. Tonight might be a little bit longer, but it all just depends on how far down the rabbit hole we go on some conversation pieces. Um, but yeah, book one, he, Bob 1.0, Splat. We get 2.0, when he becomes a computer, learn all about the changes that take place over those 100 years. And at a certain point early on, uh, Bob gets launched into space on the Hevel 1 vessel, and just post apocalypse happens on Earth. We go from 12 billion people with a B to 15 million people with an M. And humanity is really struggling there. By the end of book two, um, Bob, who, we start off with Bob 1.0, he has expanded through 8 to 10 different generations out from original Bob 1.0, and Frank citing 137. So I assume that's over 137 Bobs at that point, which is quite a lot. And would really like to get into the discussion about yeah, it's a good point. That's where I get tripped up. Xander says, is Bob actually version 3.0, considering he was restored from a backup before his initial launch?
Yeah, I think
Um,
we're at technically 4 though, because original and then the restore, and then didn't he get into a new? I guess that would be 3. He got into a new Heaven Vessel, his second design.
which brings even more questions because each time we notice a pattern, each time there's a copy, there's a little bit difference. And each generation, there are slight variations to the personality. And yeah, so what Xander says, it really kind of makes me stop and wonder when they talk about original Bob, because at some point in the second book, they just start referring to Bob 3.0 um, as, original Bob, when he's not really original Bob, right? He is in the replicant sense as far as they can go back to, I guess. Um, but yeah, so kind of easing into this, want to talk a little bit about um, book one. Would love to hear some of your guys' favorite thoughts and takeaways from book one. Want to kind of remind everyone where we're at going into book two, um, and just reminding ourselves a little bit of our humanity and hanging out with people as we live in these very interesting times.
Yeah, so I think it'd be Vox, how you pronounce that. I could see Replicant 1 being considered 1.0. Makes some
Mm,
sense. And then Xander, I believe you are correct. It wasn't a restore, it was transferred from one to the other, so that doesn't count as an additional one.
good point. Good point. Um, but yeah, book one, Pete. We just did the Geek
Book
Out
1.
stream 2 weeks ago. Um, for those of you who didn't catch it, it's in our archives if you want to contribute to the discussion there through comments. Um, but yeah,
More on Book 1.
more on book one.
So there was a lot of different things we ended up seeing. We talked about it prior where um, Bill was MVP. He,
Mm,
split off from Bob, was a clone, and he wanted to build stuff and do other things. The Skunk Works, the Scud or Scut.
yeah,
Um,
he got to be puppet master slash mad scientist, just chilling there in his lab, cooking up stuff.
yeah. And then we got, First Contact with how whichever version variant of Bob original actually is with the Delton. So that was exciting. We
Mm-hmm.
got, a lot of worry and concern from Mario when he goes out and he's exploring,
Right.
and, there's whole places being destroyed.
Yeah, Mario with the others, spoilers for book two, etc., on the table. Um, yeah, we get to see a bit more of Mario in book two.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed the others story arc. Um, yeah, Bill definitely is one of my favorites too. Um, yeah, I Vox 3, I would like to go down the rabbit hole a little bit on Bob's obsession with the Deltons as well. Um, because you see it through a lot of different Bob's eyes, just kind of their perspectives about how he has a second family with the Deltons and really obsesses with them. Um, Homer, yeah, Homer's one of my favorites too. Uh, man, so much there that I want to talk about with Homer in book two. Um, but sorry, yeah.
So, I guess considering book one, I was a little disappointed about how Bob came so dialed in because the original or some of his other copies, he likes to switch up research topics. And then
Mm-hmm.
in book two, we get a little bit more in that, and he does actually admit as soon as he found he got very hyper focused or dialed into it. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
there's a point with Bob. Just to keep life simple, we'll stick with Bob 2.0, or original Bob. We're referring to the replicant. But at a certain point in book two, they talk about how he didn't even leave orbit for several years, just hanging around and obsessing with the Deltons, playing as Sky God. And man, the story arc in book two, I really would like to go through and pick some of that. Um, and then the other big story arc that starts in the first book is Howard. We get a little bit of that,
yeah.
and then we get a lot more of that through book two. Um, but yeah, but yeah.
So leading
So
into two.
no, I want to take a pause there, collect our thoughts. Appreciate all the feedback from the audience on that. Um, we talked a bit about what everybody's favorite Bob was, and a lot of big ones came up there. Did we talk about your favorite Bob, Pete, from book one?
Uh, Trying to remember which one I said. I wanted to say it was original Bob because I liked the first contact. That's
Okay.
always something I enjoy from sci-fi because I do it to kind of escape the tedium or whatever of day-to-day life. So
Mm-hmm.
seeing that abstract concept of another being or another race is
Mm-hmm.
exciting.
Right. Right. Um, Trying to think. I just finished up book two, so it's hard to say from book one which one was my favorite. But yeah, Bill's the MVP for sure. Um, but yeah, uh, trying to think.
Bill's the best Bob.
Bill's the best Bob.
Yeah,
Oh man, Sanders hacking chats. Um, but yeah, so
with the way Howard leaves everything off, right?
yeah, is that where we're at?
I felt like that's how we were trying to bring them together.
Oh yeah. So yeah, it's very interesting following the Bob's progressions through one and two, and the further the generations get out. I think that was the train of thought there before I got lost in chat. Um, he, the Bob 2.0 really thinks about himself as human in a lot of ways, and the further the generations go out, the more distant they come from humanity. Um, and you see that more and more with the later generations. And I think Bill even calls it out at one point in
Yeah,
the
throughout two, he mentions it.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, it's post-apocalyptic, and one of the big takeaways I got was at a certain point in book one, Bob realizes he's a free agent, right? Because when he was originally created, it wasn't just a straight up copy. Faith really got into his code, and then we find out later in book two, the was it New Zealand maybe somebody get, I'm not looking at my notes in chat, who
Oh,
originally came up with the design um, for the
no, that's where
replicant
they ended
systems.
up. I want to say Australia because the Australian probe, where the guy's like, last chance, get on your bike, and anyway, the accent I heard in my head. I think it's Australia, but they ended
Right,
up in New Zealand after the
right.
war.
It all changes
Yeah,
too because of Faith's intervention with how they draw the different lines. But at a certain point, he's a free agent after he goes through and gets rid of all of Faith's imperatives and everything. And it started that official World War III. Um, there we go. Thank you, Eric. New Zealander is in the Aussie Federation. Um, but yeah, he could have just walked away when everything was breaking loose. But Bob 2.0 felt it was important enough to um, do what he was supposed to do. And I think a lot of it was through his um, personal relationship with, was it Landers from book one, his only actual friend. And so much of his time is spent with the ephemeral there, which we'll get to more later in the book discussion as far as like his relationship and relatability to them. And, he makes that next cohort, and Riker goes back and deals with the post-apocalyptic situation.
yeah. I think we ended up talking about that in the book one discussion. How sci-fi is environmental pressures, which are
Mm-hmm.
going to dictate how it's going to diverge. And there's a lot of
Yeah.
good points here. I don't want to get too off track, but when Bob one first diverges or creates his clones from his backup, you get to see there's like a direct correlation for each environmental pressure because part of him's wondering what is happening to humanity, and that's Howard. Part of him is like, well, I had this other interest in my previous life, and that's where Bill comes out. And then part of him, wants nothing to do with it and thought he was done with it, and that's where Mario and Milo just kind of diverge and they don't want anything to do with it. Also, for I think Bill talks about it in book two for clones of Rikers or Riker's tree. They're just
Yeah.
getting sick and tired of people. So it's interesting to see it diverging. And
Mm-hmm.
then one thing they touched on in book one, I wish they touched on more in book two. I forget who it was mentioned that he still had the original copy that he made someone else from. So as
Mm-hmm.
they're becoming less and less tolerant of ephemerals, maybe go
Mm-hmm.
back a couple generations for those. Yeah, you'd
Mm-hmm.
have to keep or update them, but you know,
Yeah, it's interesting to see the progression, and at a certain point at book two, the Bobs have had more memories and life experience as essentially a computer matricy than they have as a human. And um, Vox 3 brought up a good point. Like, did Bob 2.0 really have a choice, though? It'd be pretty cool to leave humanity to die. And yeah, for Bob 2.0 at that point, in a lot of ways, it was a no brainer for him. And we follow that in book one, his responsibility to uh, Landers and humanity, even though he didn't like Faith. And then by the end of book two, you just see so many generations out that they're just dismissive of humanity's needs at a certain point. Um, but yeah, it's interesting to follow the progression. So uh, just wanted to do a quick shout out um, right now in the same spirit of humanity and taking care of each other. Thank you for those of you who are out there working in these current times. I know here locally in the US, there are a lot of areas on lockdowns with the current pandemic. So, practicing a bit of humanity for our fellow neighbors is important. Thank you to all the workers who cannot just stay at home and go out. Replicants have it pretty good. They're not susceptible to the same type of things that we are. So yeah, thanks for practicing some social distancing with us here tonight, talking about the Bobiverse. We try to do these Geek Out book discussions around the same time. Come hang out, and yeah, yeah. Um, oh
Oh,
man, got the chat going. Go ahead, Pete.
I was gonna say on to two and or with all this free time, some of us are ending up with books. Books help with the day to day, expanding
True.
into, you know, other worlds, which is
Yes.
why I enjoy it so much. Yeah, just follow along, and we enjoy your company now, and we've got several coming down the pipeline.
There's so many
Um,
benefits to it too. Reading.
yeah,
Um, I kind of want to talk a little bit and get some feedback from the audience too about how they go about getting their reading material. I know a lot of people were relying on libraries for free content. We've talked about Audible being an amazing resource. I'm also a big fan of Kindle Unlimited. Most of the books we've done through these Geek Out streams are included in the Kindle Unlimited package. Um, Also check out. I see some friends in here, some fellow replicants from the Bobnet subreddit. So I give them a shout out. And while you're on Reddit, there's a number of good resources to work on for uh, building up your reading backlog, your to read backlog. We'll try to include all the links in our descriptions after the stream, but r/free ebooks, there's a lot of people giving away free content right now.
due to the
Yeah,
pandemic.
yeah, it's been really encouraging. A lot of people are impacted in various ways right now through the pandemic, and it's really encouraging to see so many companies come out and provide free stuff. There's all sorts of authors offering free Kindle downloads for a limited time on there. And I think there's even a free audiobooks subreddit doing something similar.
That, and then if you're worried about download costs and whatnot for all that data, I can't speak to whatever provider you're using, but my current internet provider expanded how much they're going to allow, just kind of bumped everybody up a tier and said,
Yeah,
hey, we know everybody's at home. We know you're doing a lot. Things can be tight. So,
a lot more people on the internet with everybody home,
yeah.
um, saving on their data. But yeah, it's really encouraging. I think Audible also has something set up for kids right now where they can listen to a number of collections for free. Uh, Xander called out Los Angeles Public Library has a lot of online material too. So that's something worth checking out. And I haven't personally used it, but I've heard Libby is really good. And I think you just need a library card for that. So a lot of good resources out there. I'm pretty confident most of our Geek Out streams coming up, there's ways to get those resources if you watch the different subreddits, and then they're covered in Kindle Unlimited, which I think there's a 2-month promotion right now. Uh, yeah, Mark says I use Audible. I've listened to the series multiple times. We're right there with you, Mark. The Audible productions are incredible.
Yeah, and also Matthew, we have a problem with that a lot too, where we get blurred the lines between where one ends and the other one begins.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about it for this series, it just kind of abruptly ends, but then it
Right.
also picks up in the same vein. So I understand that.
Especially if you've been through the series so many times, you definitely notice a lot more, but it blurs together as just one big epic story. Um, the only complaint I had with this audible narration, and Peter might feel differently. I, for the most part, liked it. Ray Porter's really good. There just seemed to be a couple edits on this one where all of a sudden it got really quiet or it sounded like he was away from the mic. So it kind of took me out of it there for a little bit. But overall, um, yeah, yeah, audiobooks are amazing. It's the only way I can get through content.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, on to book two.
Yep, real quick. Karen Hall, what's the next book up for review? We are doing Dungeonborn Book 3, and that
Mm-hmm.
will be our Geek Out next Saturday or next Sunday.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we do our best to try to keep the calendar updated. That's and the link for that will be below. Um, Dungeonborn series is pretty good. Uh,
Or I'm sorry, The Divine Dungeon.
the Divine
First book
Dungeon.
is
Yes, thank you for the
Dungeonborn,
correction.
but it's yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Another book I just finished recently that kind of relates to current times that might be uh, on the potential Geek Out streams is Scythe. I don't want to get too far into that, but the contrast between now and that futuristic utopian society is pretty interesting, where they don't have to worry about disease and all those struggles. Um, but yeah, so as we said, book one end up with Bob 1 or 2.0, spending time with the Deltons. We just got them back to the original Flint source. Things are looking good. The Sky God is doing what he can to say who needs the Prime Directive, I think, our Star Trek reference, um, and just doing everything he can to bring him out of the Stone Age. And then Riker's working on post-apocalyptic Earth down to 15 million with an M left of humanity, which translates to 1,500 ships or 1,500 trips. Um, Mario's discovered the Outsiders' alien threat, and Bill is playing puppet master slash mad scientist. And I need to look at it. I know there's a Bob family tree out there, but even though Bill's not getting out there, he's doing what he can for the Bob reproduction mission.
yeah,
Um,
he branches out a little bit. We see Garfield in
mm-hmm.
one, and then he creates another one across interstellar space without a Bob oversight. I'm trying to remember the guy's name. Something about keeping with the Blue County theme.
Oh, yeah, yeah. The Bob's name choices are pretty funny, and the references we get. I think Hungry is one of my favorite names from the second book. Uh, Anna asks, "What is your favorite quotable quote in this book?" There are so many good quotes from both of these books. Um, uh,
I now, of course, I can't quote it because I don't know it exactly, but when Mario is talking to the dwarves or his four clones, and they
mhm,
start bickering about if they get all of their knowledge from a fictional TV series, and they're going back and forth, and all of a sudden Mario's like, "Can we stop arguing and focus on the alien destroying rampaging what's it for now?"
yeah,
Because it happens where we all go down the rabbit hole and get distracted, and it's just
hmm
like, come on, that's not what we're here for. That's not what we're doing. Get back
yeah,
on track.
yeah, yeah. There's some interesting lessons there too from watching the different Bobs work with each other because a lot of people struggle working with similar personality types. There are benefits that we get to see through the Bobs, but yeah, yeah.
So,
Um,
sorry.
Go ahead.
Continuing on with it, it's interesting to see how the Soul is going, and then how Vulcan is going. Um, I'm sorry, that's Howard. Yeah. Riker's back at Soul, and how Howard's dealing with everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. First book ends with finally expanding beyond Soul. William says first book ends with a group of people landing on Spock's homeworld.
Yeah.
So many Star Trek references in this book. It's obvious that Dennis E. Taylor is a Trekkie. Um, Other shout out along those lines. Over on the BobNet subreddit, I think that there might be a Ask Me Anything scheduled with Dennis E. Taylor. Certainly worth checking out. Um, but yeah, it so many Star Trek references. There was a Dune reference in book two.
Oh man,
Um,
references for the naming choices, as simplistic as they are, they really fit.
mm-hmm,
Because like we've got Thor, who is very much about the weapons, and there's a moment where they're like, I think the question is, can we win? Like,
yeah,
we know we need to do something, but can we win? And then the guy who's like, wait a minute, did we decide on war already? Is Wally, which if you ever seen Wally in the movie, he's
yes,
very laid back. And then
yes.
yeah, it's just a
You're
lot of good
referring to
feels.
with the others
Yeah.
as they're ramping up for that. But yeah, it's a lot of good pop culture references. As they're saying in chat, Star Trek, pay homage. We're products of Trekkie. I've seen my fair share of each of the generations. So I'm not current on the most recent one. Um, I'm sure some people out there know better than I do about the new, I think it was a fan made Star Trek. I think I'm good up until about Deep Space Nine. Uh, but yeah, back on point. Howard's story arc is really interesting to follow um, as he gets things established on the Vulcan and Romulus colonies. Um, Book two, we get a romance subplot, which I think is really interesting. There's several points throughout the book where you really have to stop and question, how the replicants and ephemerals and everything, how um, just a lot of philosophical questions.
Yeah, we were
Um,
talking about it a little bit offline for like, or at least first one, how Sandbox Bob doesn't have a soul. Are you killing yourself off? How Guppy, they gave him more memory space and he's
mhm.
expanding. How the Amy controllers, when in
Yeah,
book one talking to Landers, how there was an incident. They thought, humans were considered pests and they tried to purge them. Book two, a couple points that we run into, like right off the bat when we first meet up with Howard at Vulcan. Um, the Raptors attack and Amy Bacco, and he's just
hmm
like kind of a subtle, nod. It's like, I wonder if the Amy's gonna need therapy.
right. And they joke about it, but it kind of makes you wonder, like, what is intelligence? In a lot of ways, it's easy to humify um, Bob 2.0 because, like, he, from his point of view, um, died a human at age like 32, 33, and then early on in the book, he pretty much wakes up as a computer. So it's a lot easy to think of him as a human, but he is essentially an AI, right? And you see him move further away from thinking as a human. And maybe some other people have differing opinions on that, but it's interesting to see the change. And then also like what is a being, right? Like what is not really human, but as you said with the guppies, it's interesting to see the differences between some of the bobs, the personality of the guppies. And if you think about it, we're only at like 40 to 50 years at this point, and they keep saying they're essentially immortal. And that's one of the things that I think the later generations keep bringing up. But if the guppy, who is Admiral Akbar, it's a trap, Star Wars reference, um, he continues to evolve and um, uh,
So on that note, he gives him the extra RAM, and you
right.
always see a moment where he's like, "Oh, he's not much of a conversationalist. Oh, I gave him
Hmm.
all this, room to expand, and he's not doing
Right.
anything." But I would argue that he is, because there's a lot of moments where he gets a feeling, and
Mm,
he's like, "Oh, well, I got a sardonic amusement from Guppy, but if
hmm.
questioned, I couldn't tell you what sardonic amusement looks like on a fish." And I think
Right.
there's more of a emotional underlying factor to Guppy, and it's not as black and white as someone, conversating or talking over it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, yeah.
Well, they're also connected, right? Like they're all running on the same hardware. And Guppy was designed as this interface to kind of help him offload some of the multitasking uh, needs, right? Man, I wish I had a Guppy of my own right now. But yeah, so it's pretty much an extension for Bob into more of the computer functions. And they continue to expand, and Bob continues to expand and grow and collect memories. With Guppy, could be piggybacking on that. And yeah, it's just really interesting. It's fun sometimes to stop and think, like, man, where's the Bobiverse going? And um, lost my train of thought. So,
So, real quick, one from Matthew. One thing I would really like to discuss is in book two, why didn't the Bobs, especially pioneered by Bill, begin replicating a substantial group for research and development dedicated Bobs early on? Um, I
it's a
would
good question.
think it's mainly because he wants to feel like he's still human. There's a lot of that back and forth with the oh overarching no emotions bit. I forget the word. The choke collar he has on. We get to see him take it off. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
anyway, it's gonna bug me. I'm gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
Essentially, there were the program that he couldn't express his feelings, that he just had a mellow whatever, and he's able to do anything, and it's more what the Bob wants to do. There are a couple instances where, hey, we need you to do this, we need you to be the Armada, this is the situation you've landed in, kind of like
Mm-hmm.
with Mario's clones. It's like, hey, we need to figure this out. And I'm a little disappointed, but I feel at the beginning it was more of a, we can do whatever. We want to still feel like we have our individuality, and that we, you know, we'll find stuff, we'll do other things. And just like with, oh, the name escapes me, the main Bob who is with original or 2.0 Bob, who leaves after the Deltans leave. He starts heading off, and then Bob's like, maybe we have a maternal or paternal instinct, and he wanted one
Oh,
of his own.
yeah.
Yeah. So
It's interesting. So yeah, Matthew asked, why didn't the Bobs, especially pioneered by Bill, begin replicating group for research and development dedicated to Bobs early on? Um, Fox brought up a point about Bob was clearly not a real-time strategy player. It took him a while to figure out doing certain things early on pays off dividends in the long term, like prioritizing auto factories.
yeah.
And yeah, one of the first rules the Bob set up is like the senior Bob's in charge, and he was really headstrong in a lot of ways, and they talk about that in book one, and that you see some problems with it between the other Bobs later on because they're essentially just copies. But yeah, Bob um, hurt himself in several ways, and later on in book two, you hear the later generations almost always starting with 3D printers on 3D printers, bootstrapping up, and they reference learning from original Bob's experiences. Um, so in a way, like it seems like from the later generations, you see that progress and lessons learned, and then the earlier generations, like Bob, uh, this whole book he still spends obsessing over the Deltons, right? The ephemerals. So he's getting that social interaction and able to relate to them a little bit better. So much to the point where it seems like the later Bobs look at him between like reverence of almost a deity, the root of us all, to um, kind of shunning him in a way. And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, Pete, and the audience. But like they really talk about his almost in a bad light, like he got an extra dose of Bob's anxiety or his, just different challenges and whatnot. So it's an interesting dynamic to follow throughout book two.
Endocrine controls.
There you
That was a
go.
word I couldn't think of. Yes, and you see that a lot. Each Bob has kind of a different spin or a different ideology because, like,
Mm-hmm.
Bill is saying, with everybody saying ephemerals, it's
Mm-hmm.
breeding they're less important. And then
Right.
they talk about with original Bob having more anxiety and that being a different thing. So it's all depending on which view or which lens they're looking through.
Right.
Um, yeah, I lost the train of thought for my next point.
They shun it. They use ephemerals in a derogatory term, and Bill keeps noticing that. And Bill's from the first core cohort, right? Um, so I mean, he's still as old as the rest of them because like the way the replicant system works is, and Howard does a good job explaining it to Bridget on the Vulcan colony where she's asking like, so do you guys share the same thoughts? Do you do this? Do you do that? It's like, no, we're original and unique, but they have essentially a backup or the memories of all of their ancestors, right? Um, almost like in a Dune reference to the Bene Gesserit sort of the way where he can go back and tap into that experience. He can't really get advice per se, but um, there would definitely be a lot more relatability between the different chains the closer they are because they all have the same memories up until that point, right? So Bill just has um, Bob 1.0, Bob 2.0, and then Bill. But generation 8 or 10, it's more and more of each variance of the Bob memories, right?
So, real quick, Restream is having a problem picking up chat from select places. Just kind of a heads
Okay.
up if we miss any of anybody talking through.
Oh,
I'm bringing up other additional windows
good
to
catch.
double check things. Yeah, yeah. So where
Okay.
we're at, talked about Bob's and all that. Mm-mm-mm. I really enjoy how much Bob interacts with the Deltons,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a lot of feels there. Um, mm, and we talked about how it's his family, and there are several different um, situations where, kind of like when, oh, brain fart.
The Delton story arc.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's go down a little bit deeper on that. And now that we got chat up, we'll be putting up the different chats to read off your feedback. But I found the Delton arc very interesting. Um, Bob's, like we said, he's working on his Archimedes and trying to take care of him, and we find out the bigger threat of the hippogriffs, right? And early on in the book, um, he kind of goes back and forth on how much to intervene, but he has that parental um, streak where he wants to take care and care after the Deltons. And as he continues to go through and face these challenges, it's interesting to see him humanize them and compare them and their logic between the Deltons and the human. But yeah, it just keeps escalating, right? With the hippogriffs. Um,
Yeah, and then he eventually ends up getting banished.
hmm
Um,
And all he was doing was trying to help, right? And he obviously takes it pretty hard. Again, this um, computer that thinks it's a human feels like he's lost his family, right? When he gets banished. Um, Something that uh, a lot of the other Bobs have trouble relating to. Um, and then he still kind of watches from afar, but he has Marvin there as well, which I think was from his first cohort when he got to Delton. Let me see here, to Delta Eridani. Uh, Matthew asks, how long till Bobiverse Book 3 discussion? We don't have it booked just yet. Eventually, we wanted to talk a bit about Book 4 coming out. Uh, it's been a long time since the first three got finished up, but those of you who don't know, Dennis E. Taylor is expanding the Bobiverse. Uh, Fourth book is supposedly done and in the works on production. So should see that soon-ish.
I would say tentatively 3 weeks because we have, or well, 2 to 3 possibly because we
Mm-hmm.
have next week scheduled and the one after that.
Mm-hmm.
But also pending on timing and life.
Yeah, if there's demand, we can definitely get it on the calendar sooner than later. Thank you, Matthew and Jessica. Bobiverse is one of my favorite, more recent sci-fi series. Um, it's just so much fun, and in a lot of ways, I could see the potential, especially if um, they do a time hop, which could be fun. Uh,
Oh man, yeah, there's so many different things that they could expand on. And after he's had a chance to, between 3 and 4, and all the fan input and everything else, it could go
hmm
a lot of great ways.
hmm Yeah, it really could. Um, but yeah, Bob, we spent a lot of time with Bob too through the book, um, through the second book, and it's a nice little reminder that as much as some of the later generations shun him, he's still the reigning master with VR. He's still the when he finally gets involved with the Android project, he kind of reminds everyone why he's the original Bob. Um, and it's just interesting to follow him through. He does everything he can to set up the Deltons, to the heartbreak of losing them, to trying to help Archimedes from a distance, and even some of the other Deltons kind of like pick up on the way that some of these plans work. I think Arnold at one point suddenly says like, "Oh, uh, I'm sure the Bob had something to do with this. I don't want to know," or however he words it in his
Oh yeah, yeah,
Austrian
yeah.
accent.
Yeah, that was a good scene where
And,
the reverse psychology or backwards triggering happens. They're
right,
becoming overpopulated and trying to get them to go off.
right. And I think again, Bob watching and playing caretaker as a sky god really helps him keep in touch with his humanity. Um, Again, he's the reigning master of VR code. Later in the second book, I forget who it is, but we start to notice that the different Bobs are caring
Less
less and
and less
less.
about their
Yeah,
VR environment.
yeah. And in the first book, that was such a crucial part of his sanity. Like he was so frustrated in some of the earlier scenes because he was used to talking with his hands, these appendages, like moving around. He wants to have neck control so he can bob his head. these these little cues that are so important for humans, where we pick up on the body language and the tone of voice, um, for as far as like simple data goes, uh, are not as important. And like the earlier Bobs have some of those more human ticks in their VRs.
Yeah,
Um,
like Riker with putting his hands through his hair.
yeah, as a replicant, the motion serves no purpose. Um, so it's interesting to see the progression. And gosh, going down the rabbit hole, if they do a time hop, think about how much the Bobs could diverge even further. Um, pro ephemerals against ephemerals or whatnot.
So I feel like they do good already with kind of uh I don't know how to say it. Every dog has its day type deal where,
Mm-hmm.
Bob, Bill, they're all still, Riker still about the people.
Right.
We
Right.
get people verging off doing the ephemeral bit.
Right.
Um, we have, yeah, it it goes back to that original Bob or Bob 2.0 and
Mm-hmm.
expanding in every current pressure that's on them, creating
Mm-hmm.
a different scope or whatever about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Um, and yeah, just their interest, because as they accumulate the new knowledge, they're experiencing different things. That's why Bill's able to get a lot of these different inventions done, the new technology, reverse engineer, and then all of his cohorts after that get all his memories. Like heck, we talk about how awesome memory stones are from the Divine Dungeon series. Imagine inheriting all of your ancestors' memories up until that point. Jack of all trades, keep accumulating knowledge.
I I so sidestep, yes, but we get to see moments where the memory stones are good and the memory stones are bad because,
Mm,
sorry, off topic. Tom is just furious at the Amazonians, and it's not really relevant. It's like 400 years past. Like it is, but it
spoilers
isn't.
on another series. Spoiler on another series.
Okay.
Sorry. That was my
Uh,
bad.
Back to Vox. Sorry we missed it. I was technical difficulties. Worried that too much fan input could possibly spoil the series through. Hopefully, Dennis E. Taylor has his direction for future books already. I can see it being good and bad. Recently, there's a lot more input from everything. Like
Mm-hmm.
back when I started playing video games,
Mm-hmm.
there wasn't a whole lot of input, but literally now everybody's on Twitter. Everybody gets their 2 cents. Everyone can talk about this, talk about that, bugs, and that's a different
It's
scenario, but it very much translates into books, and it's good and bad because it allows them to talk about good points, what they like, dislike,
mm,
and it can also, shape the direction. I would agree with that.
uh,
Um,
I think I saw an interview with him, and I might be wrong through Google, where I think he talks a little bit about that. You have to be careful using ideas that you find or could have found. Um, just for liability issues. Um, but
Okay.
yeah, I could be wrong there. Um, so do you want to finish up on Bob 2.0 with the Deltons, or should we explore some of the other story arcs next?
Uh, we can explore some of the other story arcs.
Sure. And then guys, toss in chat. We want to be mindful of your time too. What story arcs do you guys want to explore and go down the rabbit hole a little bit more? Um, we spent a lot of time with Bill. We spent a lot of time with Bob. We see a lot more Mario, I think, in book two than we did with uh, book one and exploring the others and the battle there.
So, real
Um,
quick on that note, and in the previous stream for book one, I said I just wrote off Mario as dead as soon as he went off, and now he's playing a critical role.
yeah,
But one of Bob 2.0's clone, Bender, I believe it is,
yes.
doesn't come back, doesn't collect the plans, isn't retransmitting. So now I'm kind of writing him off as dead, but then I'm also like, more could be going on about this.
Well,
Um,
I'm not sure how much you've read about book four, but I believe we explore the Bender story arc, and maybe those who are following it a little bit more closely can chime in and chat. But yeah, there's a lot of times where it was like Luke and Bender, where are they at, where are they at, and I believe Luke comes back,
yeah,
and I believe there's even a scene at one point where Bill's like, "No, I still haven't heard anything about Bender because he's the puppet master." Um, but yeah,
yeah. Thank you, Vox. There. Book four, The Search for Bender,
there we
is
go.
its tentative title. So that's
Okay.
in the future.
Yeah.
Hi, future me. This is what happens.
Uh,
Also, I like the point Vox made with wouldn't the anti ephemerals just go off and do their own things? I don't see why the division would cause conflict between the Bobs. And they
it's a
do
good point.
reference that where, there's a moment Bob or one of the clones says, I wonder what would happen if I didn't like any of my clones. And he's like, doesn't matter because the galaxy's a big place. So, a possible separate side story arcs could
Yeah.
be exciting.
Yeah. And it could start there, but who knows how it could grow and evolve. Because again, like from their perspective, as time progresses and they just spend more time interacting with each other, how much more of that humanity will degrade away, right? Um, but yeah, it's interesting. I need to take a quick 2 minutes. Um, what are you moving on to next, Pete?
Oh, I really wanted your input on the next one,
Oh
so
yeah.
I will be elsewhere. I guess kind of down the similar line of or you're good, down the similar line of everything. So with the Bobs possibly diverging and going off and doing their own things, he does come from humans. And a part of what we ran into book one, where there's essentially World War III, and now in book two, we're having them kind of diverge into different solar systems. And we're seeing Romulus and Vulcan, they're already kind of like back at war, and we see a lot more of that with the Faith Enclave. Uh, Honestly, never liked them from the get go, but it serves a purpose in having a bad guy or a disagreeable person. And I would like and hate or possibility for all the Bobs, even though they're all diverging right now and it's not a big deal, but for them to kind of niche or group up, kind of like we were saying with all the ephemeral disliking people or anti ephemerals going off and doing their own thing. Well, after expanding so far, then coming back, and with all the people who are, exerting a lot of effort to saving humanity and saving, the Pavs or, intelligent species, and then kind of we get a little bit of the android influence and how they're becoming their own new species or new I don't know. Anyway, more ways that it could expand, and as much as like the galaxy's a big place, I would hate to see them come back and yeah, yeah. But I think with Scut and everybody always being connected, it shouldn't be too big of a problem.
Scut really changes the name of the game and the series. Just that little technology alone. I really enjoyed Bill's hazing there. As everybody gets connected to Scut, I think at one point later in the book, it's like 10 different connections. So like the Bobiverse has really expanded. Um, but yeah, the part with Howard too, um, being able to be anywhere at once, especially once they start getting the androids created. I'd really like to talk about that and the potential there for the Bobiverse. Um, but yeah, let's see here.
Oh man, I lost the train of thought on what I was going to ask you about or what tangent.
So yeah, Xander says Faith is like Dolores Umbridge, not a bad guy, but the bad guy you just hate because of their personality. Um, yeah, good
Yeah, and
point, Lisa. In book one, they could have really explored and showed us some of the other replicants and the struggles they went through. Um, yeah, I mean, they do does book one does a good job introducing us to the world, but we really only experience it through Bob's point of view through those earlier chapters. Um, but yeah, did we?
okay. So Box says, I think the big question at this point is whether or not Bob can or would even want to go rogue, cut off all ties with Bobnet and go dark. That it's that was an underlying feeling initially, like we talked about with Bob 2.0, because he was like, I did everything I had to, we could do whatever. And I'm sure that's still an underlying feeling, or that you'll eventually get a Bob who feels that way and goes off in that direction. It's very possible, and
Mhm.
I think it would be a separate side arc. I don't think it would
Yeah.
be a big impactor for things going on.
Well, it's a big universe.
Yeah, yeah,
I don't think we've even touched on the fact that in book one we were so surprised to find uh, alien life, but we find out in book two that it's much more like Star Trek than we were led to believe. That it's like every 2 to 3 systems they find either a species or
compatible
yeah, a place to
ecosystem.
colonize.
Yeah,
Oh man, be curious to hear everyone's favorite colony planet. Because by the end of book two, humanity is finally spread out, or at least has colony ships on the way.
or yeah,
But
we've got three going, right?
for some reason, I was
Or
thinking it was more than that because oh, ha,
well, we have
maybe not. We have
Vulcan.
potentials. I
Or
think you're
yeah,
right. We
yeah,
have
yeah,
the three, at least three, up and going by book two,
yeah.
which is like Poseidon, Vulcan, and Romulus are our three big ones there. And then Sol, but there's also later down the line, I think we spent some time on Clown Car Planet. Um,
Yeah.
like Bob has a very dry sense of humor, and it's he definitely keeps that going at least throughout the generations. But yeah, Vulcan. Um, let's go down the rabbit hole there. Curious to hear people's thoughts on yeah, Jessica. good point. The names of all the Bobs and the colony planets are hard to keep track of. Uh, and what notes I do have prepared in my Google Doc, I'm just trying to write down all the different Bobs because there's just so many cool cohorts, and you hear just one of them or just one name for a little bit, and then we move on. Not to mention the couple big space battles we do have. There's not a whole lot. I know Peter and I got into this where he felt like there's a lot of space combat in book
Yeah,
two. Um,
more
and
than one, I felt.
when I went back and I re-listened to it recently, I'm like, yeah, you're right. There is more space combat, but it just doesn't seem quite as much as book one, but it's more full scale, right? I think we have like 10 to 12 Bobs all fighting.
The others.
Yeah, the Brazilian Empire.
Yeah, that battle. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And Xander's, I guess that's true. He kind of does do that initially, but
Mm-hmm.
now that he's got Scut, he's back with it. Um, sorry. He
Ragnarok
halfway
is
does. Oh,
Bill's planet, right? The one that Bill's working on, where he's testing the android
uh,
on.
yeah. That's where the skunk works and our initial
Mm-hmm.
landing and all
Mm-hmm.
that. Trying to create a habitable planet.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Sorry, you were saying Pete or
Xander said he halfway does it when he creates the first cohort, with him doing his job for humanity, faith despite,
mm,
deleting all their imperatives and controls.
mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, he's allowed to go off, and he found the Deltans and all that, and then gets brought back in with the
Right,
Scott communications.
right, right. Um, yeah. Speaking of Scott, let's talk a bit about Vulcan. They had a lot of challenges getting set up, so we get to see a lot of at least the colonization process and challenges through Howard. I think the later on they don't spend as much on the early stages, but yeah, just all the challenges there. Every time they feel like they're getting ahead, they're essentially living on Jurassic World, right?
Yeah,
Using the different dinosaur names, the raptors that seem almost sentient level intelligence, the
Broncos.
broncos
Yeah,
that are constantly destroying the fences and letting the raptors in, an invasive vine.
yeah. Which
That
then we take Peter the rabbit to
yes,
take out the vine, and then the other one, which were there's a lot more I want to say on this, but the Cupid bug, where it
yes.
lays
Oh my
eggs inside of
gosh,
you and they
can you
grow, and yeah.
can you imagine the Cupid bug? They basically say it's a little bit smaller than a hummingbird. It stings you, uh, where it then lays eggs in you, and once it starts to like swell up and they're about ready to hatch, you have like a day or whatnot before it starts eating you from the inside.
Or they go
Oh,
directly for the heart.
oh,
It
they
like
go for the
travels.
heart.
Yeah, that's why it was called the Cupid
Ooh,
bug.
I'm already not a fan of mosquitoes. Can you imagine surviving a post-apocalypse like Earth, where you're pretty much like living underground because the sky is falling? You get out to this wonderful tropical place, and now you have to worry about raptors getting in and these giant mosquitoes. Um, yeah, yeah.
But on
Howard,
that note, right there with the mosquitoes or the
mm-hmm,
Cupid bugs,
mm-hmm,
we get to see um, Howard build a Guppy Amy controlled system, and his
mm-hmm,
first ordinance or first thing he does is has the Cupid bug killers
mm-hmm.
developed and made through it. So,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
prior we were talking about has a soul, Guppy becoming more independent and kind of branching off of what is around him because Bob
right.
and Guppy are connected. Well, now Guppy has control of this and is connected to an Amy. I don't know. I'm curious. A lot could come of that.
There's a lot with the different intelligence and technologies that could evolve even further. And I think we've just scratched the surface on it because it's what 40, 50 years at the end of book two. Um, But yeah, Vulcan and Howard is a very interesting story arc. He's definitely, as you know, we've been going pro ephemeral. Um, the love subplot there really reminds us kind of how human Bob could be. You know, he cranks out some of these crazy engineering specs, yet uh, he's so socially oblivious to the relationship between Stefan and Bridget, to the point where like he's a business partner with all of them on his distillery, um, which
Yeah,
that's very funny. The challenges with Faith and Howard's distillery, and just the Bob's finally enough's enough and strikes back at him. Um, but yeah, you know, Howard gets really invested in this colony ship. And I think a couple times we see the interaction with Riker, who's the de facto face with his descendants. And I want to come back and visit on that a little bit. Um, but he's very much involved in these lives. And then once they get married, uh, he has a very, human based reaction instead of like sticking through and dealing with the project. He's just so hurt that he takes off, right? I think he leaves Dexter to take over Vulcan. I believe he was like a later colony ship. And of course, I love the theme. We stick to Bob 2, Bob Net, um, all the different Bob Dumbs. So Dexter talks about how he's kept up to date with his blog, because of course there's all the Bob blogs. Um, but
yeah,
yeah,
and even Buttersworth gets his little jab in there. You know, so many people in that time period, and they end up cloning or replicating a nerd with a sci-fi or with a Star Trek fixation. So
mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. Uh, I have a feeling that's pretty accurate. Star Trek and Star Wars are going to be classics for a long time. Um, but yeah, good point, Lisa. Howard was pretty oblivious to uh, the relationship there. And something that's really interesting, like the Bobs don't change. So the chapters, it's really nice how we get the Bob, the system, and the year, because they're not aging, right? So I noticed when I was going through the different books, it's so easy to lose track of how far the time has gone. But seeing people age through Riker's interaction with his family, I think it's little Justin, kind of helps keep us up to date on uh, the the time jumps, right? Going from a little tyke sitting on mom's lap to full sentences, and like you see the couple years jump past there. But then yeah, with the Scut and the Manny, going back and re-listening to this on Audible, Bob 2.0 gets a lot of slack for being the sky god, and being involved, and he eventually gets Charlie, that he goes down there. But with Scut, and we get to see this through Howard, they could have an android anywhere, right?
yeah,
And just the possibility there, like Sky got nothing. You're pretty much talking about anywhere, any planet, all the Bobs could physically be there as long as they had the ability to build these androids. Um, so I'm kind of curious to see how um, the Bobs, as they interact with those different androids and continue to have those human-like interactions through VR, through the android, how they continue to change and evolve. Um, I went on a bit of a rant there, Pete. Your thought
so
on?
on that whole Android bit, it makes me think. Sorry, tangent of the show, like Undercover Boss. And so
Mm,
just being able to like pop up and it's a new person and everything's going on, it's like, just kidding, I'm Bob.
right,
I
right. It
the reveal.
I have to bite my lip because we're trying to stick to only up to book 2 spoilers.
Yeah,
But yeah,
a
book
lot of
3
potential
Geek
for
Out
it.
can't come soon enough, and then we know all that is fair game, right? Um, but yeah, and towards the end of Howard's story arc, when he ventures off and starts spending time on the was it Jovian planet?
Or
Um,
yeah, the gas planet
mm-hmm,
or whatnot, and trying to
mm-hmm,
find other ways and different things. And I yet again I felt like they would just scratch the surface, and then also for Poseidon, the water planet, they just scratch the surface and talks about how the probes can't go underwater, and they had to
mm-hmm,
adjust the field so that they could go through atmosphere and this, that, and the other. So
mm,
even though we already got over that hurdle for having exploration drones and things that can do stuff, we're still at a different hurdle of different applications for it. So
right,
always
right.
more to be building, always more to expand.
They really just get the androids working towards the end of
Book two
book 2. Thanks for stopping in, Lisa.
by
Uh, yeah, we didn't call out on Fox's comment, but the distillery business does seem a bit unethical if you look at it, and in a lot of ways, I felt that Howard was a lot more human in his reactions. Um, with just the ephemerals and whatnot as well. Just the way he handled the faith situation. You talk about coloring in the lines. Yeah, it's interesting.
and
Um,
that's where it's kind of weird for me because it's kind of like how I can't think of the name for some reason. Whoever discovered America,
mm-hmm,
and reality says no, Indians were here first, but they had a
mm-hmm.
different view on what owning land really was. So even yeah, it's a little unethical, but that's on the bias or the predetermined
Well,
before.
yeah, you bring up a good point, because we get to see some of that through just the different species we interact with, and again, trying to keep in line, make sure don't spoil anything for book 3, but we also get to see like the Pavs culture, right, and
Yeah,
their perspective on things, and I forget which one discovers the Pav again, so many different Bob names, um, but yeah, just he talks about how when they're running, they run on all fours, and how it just didn't sit well with him, and it's because of his human perspective, right?
yeah.
How'd he word it?
Oh
Something
man,
about being a. Go ahead.
bipedalist or something.
Yeah. Something where like he thinks less of others for how they run, but yeah, he explores that society, and that's a big part of the other story arc, which I want to talk on or touch on here soon, um, because they are really the big threat, in my opinion, in book 2.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, they're a
it,
big point.
yeah, it's they're slowly creeping in, right? We just get introduced to them at the end of book 1, and then book 2, it's constantly from Mario, his perspective going and trying to um, figure out what's going on with the others, and the moots. um, it's a good quote, Vox. The others, terrible name, Butterworth. uh, yeah, it's it, the yeah the moots. I feel really.
Oh, that
Go
was
ahead.
one of the things I was about to say, and I lost before you left. The Australian probe is a major concern for me. I know he seems like, oh, he's agoraphobic. Oh,
Mm,
he was following a warped perspective or a warped thing of his directive. Now that we know more about the original guy who made him, I assume that's why he was following a warp directive because he installed something similar to Bob, but instead of going boom, he changed it. And for original Bob, he goes through and he does a big cleanup and a big ripping out all the imperatives. But for the Australian probe, yeah, we get a firewall for him. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we're doing other stuff, but it doesn't. It kind of glanced over. Maybe I missed it, but it doesn't talk about going through his code and trying to take out, because for Bob it was all the faith imperatives, but we don't
That's
know
true.
anything about the other side or you know
He's
Australian.
yeah, he's part of the network.
Yeah,
Um, and it's a very good point. Like in a lot of ways, I think Bob just moves into caretaker mode with him without really assessing the real threat, right? Because he was so quote unquote broken, if you will, that he had to ease him back to reality through VR and then interacting with the BobNet. But yeah, that's a big threat, and he gets invited to the moots, right?
yeah,
He's part of that group now. Um, Towards the end, the other story arc really starts ramping up. Um, they are this hive mind like species that essentially is just going through planet or solar system by solar system, planet by planet, basically like moving on every 10 to 20 years after they pretty much just um, suck all of life and metal and resources out of that system. And at one point, they talk about how they've only been at it, I believe, like 100 some years.
yeah. It's
Um,
all guesstimated, but yeah,
but yeah, it they're technologically more advanced. The Bobs are scrambling, doing what they can to get ready, and we have some minor interactions. We finally figure out where the Chinese probe went, right? And I
yeah,
think maybe the audience can correct me if I'm wrong, that the Chinese one was the only Amy um, like vessel. I think there were 5 different ones out
yeah,
there,
yeah.
and most
That
of
was
them were following the replicant um, type, where they copy a human versus building it from the ground up. So we figure out where the Chinese probe went, and the others are, we shoot. I think it's Bill through Scud sends them the 10 prime numbers, right? Trying to establish communication. Anybody who's a hardcore sci-fi fan has seen this dealt with in different ways, and we've covered a couple other different books at this point, and Children of Time, something similar where they use basic math to see um, if they're intelligent or whatnot. And so Bill shoots off uh, this mathematical problem, and it just responds in Mandarin, and pretty much tells them like they're just food. We'll get to you later, and it's a big scramble. The moots, they come together to brainstorm about how to deal with the others, and it's interesting to see the different generations of Bobs interact there. Bill trying to remind them all of their humanity with their awful softball slash scrum matches. Um, and I think Bill makes a good point, again, trying to remind them that they're human, as well as use it as an excuse to work on the VR. Uh, but yeah, it's interesting. It really is. What uh what are your thoughts about the others, Pete?
so the others yet again, like the way Dennis E. Taylor brings it all together and
Mm-hmm.
does the little hey we're over here, hey we're over here, and we keep getting little snippets and updates on the others is
Right.
good, and it's kind of a overarching thing. And then like you were saying with the Bob Moots, we get to see, how they bring their collective brains together, and
Mm-hmm.
everything from just basic hanging out in the bar and doing the baseball games to getting
Right.
serious,
Right.
and just it emphasizes how they're diverging.
It does. It does. they all start off with like the same skill set, right? In a lot of ways, I know, as I was reading, especially in the first book, it's obvious that Bob, who in a lot of ways is similar to Dennis E. Taylor's skill set, I think he's a retired computer programmer, and the way he writes these, it's obvious that he has some project management experience. So, like in a lot of ways, like all the Bobs kind to try or pretty much approach situations the same way initially and use the project management terms, but then yeah, the divergence through the moods, the different interactions there, it's interesting, and I keep wanting to say more, but then I got to ask myself, is that book three? Is that book three?
So,
Um,
side note, real quick, we talked about the Australian probe
mm-hmm,
and whatnot, and uh, Xander brought up, or sorry, Box brought up, well, the VR system is essentially if it gets, it's all networked together. So if it gets to one, it's getting to everything. Kind of like the internet, it's all got different protocols.
mm-hmm,
And the reason why it's scary is because that's almost like a new layer, a new version of interfacing. Because Bob 1 set up the firewall, and we get to see that in the UN meeting how Riker blocks it or Guppy discovers
yes,
it and it's not a thing. And and
yes.
then Homer
We haven't even gotten
ends.
to Homer yet.
Yeah, because I think we kind of glanced over it, but it's a good spot to go next. Homer ends up. Man, I enjoyed him at the beginning. I enjoyed
Mm-hmm,
him in one, but
mm-hmm,
it's just sad what happened, and it was just a
yeah,
different way of getting into the system through the tight beam signal, and how even though Bob's trying to figure out where everyone's at, what everything's doing, and just happens that a chance cleanup drone is
mm-hmm,
there to intercept the tight beam signal.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, Fox brought up a good point. Nobody wants to talk about Homer. It's sad, because like out of all the Bobs we really get to spend the most time with, Homer's one of them, right?
Yeah.
And he brings kind of a balance to the Bob group by just going over the top with his humor, right? Again, a very good example early on about how much each of the Bobs diverge, because you have Bob 2.0, in his first system, he makes the first cohort, and there's Riker. Riker is the only one wanting to go back and help out Soul. So even from the first generation on, there's a bit of that reluctance towards humanity. And, he makes his own uh, clone and whatnot, and he gets Homer. And it's a prime example early on of how different they are. Riker takes himself very seriously. So at one point, I think he really committed to the Star Trek theme, about being number two. And then Homer is just completely the other way. He's at one point, I think, using a cartoon avatar, right, during book one, just trying to really poke at Riker and help balance him out a bit. Yeah, Sanders suggests a moment of silence for Homer. It's so sad. He's one of the first Bobs, like one of the closest to originals that I think we leave or we lose early on. He, in a way, out of all the Bobs, was savior for humanity, right? Those space donuts, which again, way to stick to the theme of Homer and space
Yeah.
donuts. Yeah, uh, he saves the day because at that point with humanity, they were running out of resources, right? The amount of humanity, even though there's only 15 million, they just can't keep up with food production. The earth is becoming unlivable. And Homer sticks to the idea. He's like, space donuts, space donuts. It's like, yeah, well, and they go through it, break it down, project management styles. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. And they figure out, well, instead of having people go live there, we just do the food, right? And
That
oh my
kind of
goodness.
brings back to the whole like each branching Bob has different impactors, which make them think differently, and kind of
Right.
like how Bill is working on the Android system. And as
Right.
soon as Bob 2.0 gets his hands on it, he just leaves him in the dust.
Yep.
And then,
Yep.
yeah. So the
Yeah.
Bob moods really bring it all together for expanding it.
They do. And yeah, go back to Homer. It does bring some good things afterwards after they learn from Homer. But Vehement, who's still trying to kill off humanity even though they're dying, essentially is able to hack Homer, right? And use him as a puppet to where he gets to the point after they figure it out, like um, I think it was when Riker was at one of the new UN meeting, and he kind of baits them. He's able to, yeah, you covered it, Pete. So they sent a packet of information to Homer, and it starts making sense. The changes in Homer's behavior, why he was, acting the way he was. It wasn't that he was, just more somber because of the situation. He was literally being controlled by Vehement. Um, and, Riker figures it out. I think it's Charles who helps save the day. Uh, and they check him out. And then Homer gets rid of all his backups. And again, I think this plays into Riker and his descendants, more of how fed up they are with humanity. I think it's in book one, or might even be in book two, where I think he's talking with Charles and just talks about humanity's stupidity and how they should just let them end themselves. And no, they don't. But that was so early on that another 30 years of playing, um, what's the right word for it? Caretaker of Earth as it's dying, really wears on him. Yes. Uh, Jessica, it was a real good feel good moment when they finally get back at Vehement, when Riker
Yeah,
tracks
that
him
whole
down and
conversation.
payback. Yeah, he got his jabs in, but yeah, I don't know if they talk about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was pretty popular on BobTube, watching that replay. Uh, but yeah, they finally solved the Vehement problem, but at the expense of a lot of food, a lot of resources, and Homer.
Well, did they
Um,
though? Because we just get a brief little, hey, it's Australia,
did
and
we get rid of Vehement?
yeah, because like
Oh,
VM, yeah, we took out their main base, but it's
yeah.
just a technological curve because they don't have their cell tower,
Mm-hmm.
and we get that whole instance with Riker where he lays into Cranston
Mm-hmm.
during the UN meeting. And, he's pretty much like, hey, hopefully your guys are going to take care of this and impeach you. Otherwise, I'm going with plan B and, I'm going to take you out myself. So he's definitely a, still a factor as far as we know because he just didn't show up. So I don't think it talked about whether or how everybody addressed it. It just said that Riker didn't have to deal with him himself.
Yeah.
And so all those other cells of Vehement that are out there just don't have the technology to do whatever. So they're probably going to lay low, get on the colony ships, expand elsewhere, and then make a move at that point. So oh man, it brings me back to Madiri or Madeiros.
Mm-hmm.
And
Brazilian probe.
yeah, we get that moment of WTF where um, they don't know how many were actually launched because
Mm-hmm.
we visit him and it's like, oh, this is a variant. Oh, this is a variant. And they're like, well, there had to be several. And if you remember back to book one, that's what Landers said was their plan. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how we knew the Chinese probe was just an Amy. That's how we
Right.
knew, the Brazilian probe was trying to launch several of them throughout it, and yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah, yeah. So book two, who is your favorite character from book two?
Book two favorite character. Mm,
Curious to hear audience feedback as well. Like Homer definitely um, thoughts and feels go out to him, but who out of the Bobs do you really feel won the MVP? Um, kind of clutched it. Like Bob Bob 2.0 had several awesome moments coming through on the Android. Uh, I really enjoyed the Delton arc. Um, I really enjoyed the Delton arc with Bob. Marvin just kind of looking out after Bob 2.0, like he should get a shout out before he finally took off to go find his own. Um,
I guess that's true. We always think Bob's because that's the majority of it, but there are a lot of additional characters.
mm-hmm, yeah, there's a couple shout outs for Butterworth. Um,
Yeah, I was or I can't. Yeah, when he died,
Wait,
that
say
too.
what?
When Butterworth died.
Yes. We're about to find out. Yes. Um, but anyway, oh yeah, a lot of shout outs for Bill. Trying to think for me out of all of the Bobs, um, I really think Mario was probably one of our MVPs. The simple fact, and I'm going to go with Mario simply because Bob's wouldn't have had time if he didn't decide to just say, as much as we're talking about Bob struggling to relate to humanity, going back and he says the opposite, like I just want to get as much distance as possible, and he just goes the furthest distance. Somebody later beats him in book two, which I think it's kind of fun how they do those shout outs in the moots about like which Bob holds what record. But Mario with just the information gathering on the others. I
Yeah,
think it's a
when
number of his cohorts that do most of the fighting. So like if you have to think of like which one of our Bobs kind of are specializing down, like Mario's kind of becoming our admiral, right, out there, building up these cohorts by the end of book two. Uh, yeah, the screw you guys, I'm going the other way, says File Lore. Um, he he does, and then he ends up really saving humanity. Um, but yeah, all the latest greatest upgrades coming out that way for Heaven 5 vessels by the end of book two. Um, Look how far they've come.
Yeah,
So
and I'm still trying to decide who's my favorite, but like you were saying with Mario, he was all like, "Oh, I don't want to deal with any of this. I don't want to live in the suburbs." But then things get real, and he hunkers down and puts in a lot of effort for making sure everyone's safe. Vox says Howard was the most important arc in book two. Yeah, Howard definitely does a lot, and it brings us, kind of the whole lead up of book one, where now he's at Vulcan and Romulus, and he's putting a lot into that. Uh, Sorry, trying to catch up on chat here. Butterworth was a good one, also for like back and forth, and thank you for clarifying. Brain issues couldn't be replicated. Um, So yeah, Butterworth was a good one. We get to see kind of the change between Riker and Howard, and just it has a lot to do with what's going on in his life and the impact between it all. When he was dealing with Riker, he was trying to save his people. It was a dying world and wanted more to go on, but now it's a lot of different influences. So that makes a lot of sense. Uh, bu- bu- oh yeah, that's their age in real time, but jacking. Oh yeah, relative time sense. There's Sorry, side note on that. It's interesting because when Sheehy asks Howard how old he is, he's like, well, I have so many memories as Bob 1, so much memories as Riker, so much, as this other guy. And that was kind of cool to see, like, the family tree or where Howard ends up. Um, and then, yeah, it gets weird with how much they can adjust their time sense being immortal. Sorry, poorly multitasking. The colony ships. Oh man, what was it? Uh, I remember Butterworth getting laughs out of it.
Oh, Bert and Ernie.
Bert and Ernie. They,
Yeah, Sesame
they did a
Street.
lot. We didn't get to see a whole lot.
Yeah, yeah. Um, lot of yeah, a lot of Bobs. I think at one point somebody said that there were 137 at the end of book two,
Oh,
and
that was a how many years had passed?
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, a lot of Bobs, and we only really get to spend time with a handful of them. Like a couple of them on come on stage for a little bit. Um, yeah, we spent a little bit of time with like Rudy and Edwin later on Clown Car Planet, um, which is pretty fun. Uh, Good to see Loki a little bit as we get that space combat. Uh, I think there's a branch where they all go villain names, right? And then we had a Thor, a Loki. Thor's not a villain, but
yeah, yeah.
um, then the dwarves. Uh, yeah,
Dwarves.
yeah, dwarves names.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, sorry.
Uh,
I was between books in my head.
oh, okay, okay. Um,
Well over 100 at the end of three, so yeah, we're
right.
not quite there for two.
Yeah.
And sadly, with the others and Mario losing a lot of his clones and just the big battle with the others, we lose.
They
But we're immortal, so yeah.
they get better about doing backups. There were a couple that we lost along the way to the others because they didn't get a full backup um, squirted off, as I think the terminology they used. But we didn't. We I don't think the book even addressed. Yeah, Patrick, like, is there a possibility of an evil Bob? Like, I wonder, especially over time, as the Bobs go through these different experiences, in a lot of ways they are, uh, still very much human. And you think about the trauma that Homer went through. He pretty much had PTSD, right?
Well, we
Just
have several different. Yes, Homer did, but then we've got the Australian probe. Then we still
hmm
have, pocket cells of vehement that could get in other ways.
hmm
And kind of like with Homer, like he was directly taken over, and that was an extreme. But then the Australian probe can still influence and interact in other ways. Yeah, they have the firewall put in, but original Bob put in a firewall, and they still
hmm
got through it or around it through a different backdoor for the
right,
laser link into Homer.
right,
So
right. It's it's interesting. So, yeah, we typically try to keep these geek out streams a little bit on the shorter end, but we know in these current times that all there
we're not.
are reruns online or on TV right now. I guess people still watch cable. I think there was a comment earlier on in the chat that there's nothing but reruns on, no sports, no nothing.
Oh
So
man, there's so many memes. So,
So many
oh,
memes.
esports aren't a real sport. Now it's the only sport. I
Yeah,
I
shout.
don't need to go down that, but yeah.
It's pretty interesting. So we're going to be moving into the final act of the stream, starting to wrap things up. Um, Let us know if you feel like we missed any big points. Are there anything you guys want to go down the rabbit hole on with book two a little bit further? I I think that there's a lot that could be talked about with the replicant process. We started, exploring that with different ephemerals, if you will, thanks to Howard's love interest.
Yeah.
Um, there's a lot with the different life forms. There's a lot with the others. Uh, yeah, Pete, what are some things you feel we might have missed talking about in book two?
Uh, Real quick, Vox, I could see Bender plot being similar to being reprogrammed from Xander's.
Mm,
Yeah, so many possibilities. Things that we missed. Let's see. We talked about
well,
the
real quick on that. He does kind of like to stick with theme when he does a pop culture reference. So those of you familiar with Futurama,
bite
um,
my shiny metal.
hey, keep it PG. Uh, but yeah, yeah, could be interesting. I'm really excited for book four, and I'd like to hear some people's thoughts on book four as well. Pete.
Sorry, back up. What we missed in one. I think we covered a lot of the arcs. We talked about original Bob,
Mm-hmm.
Howard, Soul.
Mm-hmm.
We just found Clown Car Planet.
Mm-hmm.
The others. Uh, I think we did a pretty good job. We didn't go chronological. We kind of bounced all over the place. A lot of speculation, things we'd like to see.
Right. Well,
Yeah, I feel
appreciate
good
the
about two.
appreciate the audience's input. We obviously have a lot of Bobiverse fans here, and we'll make sure to let everybody know when we do the Geek Out for book three. And I know that Pete and I are going to fly through book four, so we'll probably need to make sure to give everybody at least a couple weeks after release before
Um,
we do that Geek Out session. Go ahead, Pete.
okay, yeah, probably give people a couple weeks. I was gonna say the opposite, where like it only takes X amount of hours, and that's at double speed, if not two and a half speed. So
Right,
potentials there.
right. Yeah, well, we'll listen to the community feedback. Let us know what you guys think as we get closer to it. You can reach us on any of the social media platforms, all geekonmysleeve.com or Geek on My Sleeve, in addition to our .com. Let's see, looking through some of the comments here, making sure we got everything. Um,
We'll own it on the release date.
yep, yep. Probably
Well,
pre-order it too.
actually, step back. Audible.
Yes.
They will release the hardback sooner,
I
and
don't
I
know.
don't quite have the dedication in my
Typic
life to do that. Where Audible, I can multitask,
right.
so I might be a little behind, and I guess that will give you time. As soon as the Audible release, it will be shortly after in
Don't
regards to me.
don't quote me, but I think they're actually working to get the Audible released like
At the
day
same
one,
time?
if not before.
Okay. Okay.
I read again. Don't
Or
quote
yeah,
me.
Vox says the same thing. It might be a rumor, but I think Audible will release on the same
Yes,
day.
yes.
Okay, okay.
There's
Normally they're behind.
they I think it depends. But more recently, Audible's been on it. There's a lot of good audiobook platforms out there, but I've been an Audible subscriber for a while. If you guys are not, they have promotions running all the time. You want to support the channel, check out the links down below. Um, Help us out, but they're worth it. and the amount of hours spent. I've re-listened to so many books. I've lost count how many times I've listened to the Bobiverse because it's just such an amazing series. And each time I go through it, I notice different things, especially when it catches my attention and I look at the book through that lens. For me, the we talked about in this stream, something that really hit home is just how much the Bobs progress and kind of deviate from humanity in their own way the further generations they get out there. Um,
And then
but
also
yeah.
how Bob is still the reigning person for the VR coding, and there are a lot of alternate things that could come out of it, and
Hmm.
possibly bringing other clones into being based off
Right.
of prior backups, because they're always talking about updating their backups, but at the same time, Bob still has the original backup that he made his first cohort off of, so
Yeah.
potential, and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
To lose all that experience that the rest of the Bobs have as they continue to make cohorts and diverge, right? Uh, just to start from more recent point of view with humanity. Um, but yeah, book three, obviously, it's definitely worth picking up. Um, Dennis C. Taylor does an amazing job with it. We've been trying really hard not to do spoilers for it. Um, yeah. Let me check my notes here. Final thoughts, Pete?
Seems like we've had a good turnout. Definitely something we're going to be continuing. Three
Yep,
is going to happen, matter of
yep.
when. Four and five, as far as Dennis E. Taylor is concerned, are coming out. So that's an additional two. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you again for everybody who stopped by.
Mm-hmm.
Much appreciated.
Yes. Yes. Very much appreciated. This is a community-based project, so keep sending us those book suggestions. If there's other series you recommend, something I wanted to throw out there, and you guys can leave it in the comments below and chat later. But I was looking for some good pandemic sci-fi fantasy type books. Kind of stick with current world themes. If you have any book suggestions along those lines, wouldn't mind taking Escape from Reality and checking something like that out. Uh, let's see here.
Oh man, that would be silly.
What?
Vox says Dennis E. Taylor said four and five might actually merge into a large four, but he's not sure about it.
Interesting.
Yes, get more content now. Thank you kindly. Um,
Right?
yeah, I could see it going either way.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we greatly appreciate everybody showing up for this stream. Appreciate your support. Everybody stay safe. Wash your hands. We will be back next week at the same time, 8 p.m., to discuss the Divine Dungeon Book 3. If you have the time, it's available on Kindle Unlimited, on Audible. Go check it out. Some of you may have time to get caught up and can join us for that. Xander says Hellderves, perhaps, Apocalypse Horror. Yeah, definitely going to have to check it out. If it's on Audible, it's a very real possibility.
One
So,
one thing I forgot to mention: the others depopulating the world. There's another book sci-fi that we have done and listened to called
mm,
Children of Time, and I would be
mm,
very interested to see a Children of Time-esque theme come and interact with them. Short
mm,
version, instead of being technological with electronics, they're biological, or it's all organic matter where they literally take uh, animals and creatures and turn them into spaceships. Poor example, but I'd like to see that come out. It's something I forgot about. But yeah, that's
Yeah, yeah. Children of Ruin. Have you gotten through that one yet?
I haven't gotten to the second one yet.
It's worth checking out. Kind of along these lines, and that's another one that I'd like to do a Geek Out session on in the future. But anyway, before we go down any further rabbit holes, we're going to wrap it up. Pete, thanks for joining me and
Yep.
everyone else as we geeked out on book 2 of the Bobiverse by Dennis E. Taylor. Make sure to check out the links below, including our friends over at r/Bobiverse. I think I got that right. It might be Bobnet. The links will be below. So thank you much.
Thank you. Thank you.